Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to AI Era, Islamic Abrahamic Wisdom. Today we are going to discuss a truly revolutionary step, a step that transformed government from a mere center of power into a system of responsibility and accountability. This was the establishment of the Accounts Department, not just an office, but a constitutional obligation. The year was 18 Hijri, 639 CE. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu declared that the Baytul Mal would no longer be only a place for collecting wealth. Every single dirham would be accounted for. He introduced a system where governors were accountable, officers were accountable, and the government audited itself. This was Case 30, making financial accountability a fundamental part of the Constitution. Today, we will see how Umar radiyallahu transformed auditing from a mere advisory practice into a binding constitutional duty.
Hello and welcome back. Today we're diving into something truly incredible, drawing from the foundation of Islamic jurisprudence. We're going to explore a radical idea. What if a government's most important duty was to audit itself? We're about to see how this revolutionary principle was actually established as constitutional law, creating one of the very first systems of financial accountability in history. Assalamu alaikum, and a very warm welcome to AI-Era, Islamic Abrahamic Wisdom. Before we jump in, if you enjoy what we do here, please kindly subscribe, like, and share this with your friends. This is episode 30, and it's all based on the amazing 30th chapter of the book, The Foundation of Islamic Jurisprudence. You know, it all really boils down to one huge question, a question that has defined nations and empires for centuries. Who watches the treasury? Seriously, think about it. It's a question every single government and leader has to answer, and the stability of an entire nation can hinge on that one answer. Because here's a radical truth that history has proven time and time again. Empires very rarely fall because they run out of money. Nope, they fall because no one is checking how that money is being used. When finance escapes accountability, you know what happens? Justice starts to crumble. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start by looking at the huge threat that was festering. Then we'll uncover the core principle that changed absolutely everything. We're going to see the birth of the first audit department, watch it in action, really grasp its revolutionary impact, and then we'll tie it all together with lessons for us today. All right, let's set the stage. Before this massive reform, the financial world was, frankly, a mess. And it wasn't just a lack of organization. It was a system that was practically begging for abuse. Just try to imagine a system where governors and officials collected the state's revenue as if it was their own personal income. They spent public money without keeping any real records. And the whole idea of having a high-ranking position meant you were basically entitled to the wealth. The results? Well, they were inevitable. Corruption ran rampant, and there was this deep, corrosive distrust between the people and the state. So how do you fix a problem that's so deeply embedded in the system? Well, you need more than just a few new rules. You need a completely new moral foundation. And that is exactly what was put in place. This one simple yet incredibly profound statement became the entire new financial order. Public money is an amanah, a sacred trust. And what's the absolute non-negotiable rule of any trust? It must be accounted for. What's crucial here is that this applied to everyone, with zero immunity for your rank, your status, or who you are related to. Let's just pause on this word amanah, because its meaning is everything. It's so much more than just responsibility. It's a sacred trust. This completely reframed what public service was all about. It wasn't a right you could exercise, but a profound duty that you were accountable for, not just to the people you served, but to God Himself. But look, a principle, no matter how powerful, is really just an idea until you have an institution to enforce it. And this is where the theory was hammered into a real functioning government body, one of the very first of its kind in all of history. And this just brilliantly shows the genius of the system, a crystal clear separation of powers. You had one group collecting the money, the treasury. You had another group, the governors and officials, spending it, but then you had a third, totally independent department whose only job was to check the math on all of it. And we're not talking about some informal committee here. This was a professional department. It had its own dedicated office space. It was staffed by people who were actually trained in record keeping, and they used standardized logs to make sure everything was consistent. But its most powerful feature, as we just saw, was its complete and total independence from the people handling the money. Okay, so the principle is in place, the institution is built, but how did this thing actually work? How did accountability go from being a concept on paper to being part of the daily life of a huge, growing empire? Well, the scope of these audits was total. They covered everything from the massive provincial treasuries all the way down to military spending and the salaries of officials. Even welfare payments for the poor were checked to make sure the money got to the right hands. Nothing was considered too sensitive or off limits for the auditors. Now, to make all of this possible, one uncompromising rule was put in place. You could think of it as a mantra. If it is not written, it does not exist. Verbal promises, claims, assurances, all of it was worthless. If an expense or a payment wasn't written down in the official logs, then as far as the audit was concerned, it simply never happened. Documentation replaced discretion. And, accountability wasn't just some once-a-year ceremony. It was a constant living process. Of course, you had your standard annual audits, but an audit could also be triggered by a complaint from any citizen, or after a major event like a famine or a big military campaign, or it would happen automatically whenever a governor was replaced. So the key takeaway for every official was this powerful maxim that they all understood. A governor might be the most powerful person in an entire province with immense authority, but that authority stopped dead where the audit logs began. The accounts ruled him, not the other way around. All right, now let's get into what is maybe the most revolutionary part of this entire system. This wasn't just about good administration. It was a fundamental shift in the very definition of power. For all of history before this point, the power dynamic was super simple. The powerful audited the weak. Kings audited their subjects to make sure they pay their taxes. But here, that dynamic was completely flipped on its head. For the first time, the state created an official, empowered body to audit itself. I really can't overstate this. This was a monumental first. The state's own power was being checked not by an invading army or a rebellion, by a system it created and made into a fundamental law of the land. This is the birth of institutional self-accountability. It's huge. So, what can we all take away from this 7th century innovation? Why does this piece of history matter so much in our world today? Well, because these principles are absolutely timeless. Just look at these direct lines we can draw. The idea of auditing officials and their personal wealth, that's the foundation of modern lifestyle audits and asset declarations. Separating the people who spend from the people who audit, that's exactly why we have independent auditor generals today. The demand for written records, that lives on in things like freedom of information laws. And confiscating unexplained wealth, that's the main job of modern anti-corruption agencies. When you boil it all down, it comes back to this one powerful lesson. True authority isn't absolute. It has limits. Power has a boundary, and that boundary is defined by the beginning of accountability. This principle proves that financial integrity isn't just some administrative detail. It's constitutional justice. And so, we'll end with a question for you to really think about. We've just seen the birth of a culture of accountability, but what is the real cost to justice, to public trust, and to the future of a nation when that culture is lost? Thank you so much for